Mai I ruka whiti mai I raro, kia pihi titi, kia wana teti, kia rito teti, kia tau mai tio Māori, haume, huie, taikie. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the long-term plan workshop today. Giving you the progress date, update, and also discussing the movable target, what we call the budget figures. They are a work in progress, and we will be explaining those later on this morning. I'd like to introduce myself, Vinci Belante, for the people watching online, the project lead for the long-term plan, and I will be joined later on by Andrea Rankin, who is our Chief Financial Officer, and also Bradley Robertson, who is contracted as our Senior Business Partner for the LTP for the financial aspects of it. I now welcome all of the councillors to introduce themselves for our online audience so that they know who's present.
Kia ora, Nigel Bowen. Stu Piddington.
Morning, Councillor Michelle Pye.
Good morning, Councillor Scott Shannon.
Councillor Stacey Scott.
Morning, Councillor Peter Burt. Tēnā koe, Councillor Owen Jackson.
Kia ora, Councillor Sally Parker.
Councillor Booth.
And just for the record, we've also got Councillor Oliver. Is he online? Or no, sorry, he's working, so he's going to be in and out. So he will be joining us at some point when he can. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is he zooming in because we hadn't made... Okay, no problem. So when he joins us, we welcome Councillor Oliver when he can make it. Okay. Right, thank you very much. This morning, I just want to take you through our itinerary for how today, how we have planned what we need to cover for today. I'm going to start with giving you a wee update of the progress and the process and the timelines we are working to. We've negotiated with Audit New Zealand a few new timelines. Due to resourcing issues, particularly with Audit New Zealand having to prioritize very large councils, and so they've shifted ours by just a couple weeks, but we are completely aligned to other councils in Canterbury for timing. I'm going to do a wee video of the financial concepts that you have had a number of presentations and or emails with some information about. That's just a quick recap. Then I'm going to go into our financial assumptions because we have all the updated figures from Burrell and Infometrics, et cetera. And talk about the environmental scan update because it has been updated to reflect changes in government and or new information that has come to light. Looking at our strategic priorities, again, whether or not we have them right. I know that there was a desire to have that good, engaging conversation so that you can absolutely be confident that the priorities you had determined before are still going to be the framework under which you want to view the LTP activities. And then I have some key questions. Because we need this workshop really to get some direction from you. At 11 a.m., we're looking at starting the draft budget update, and even though we call it a draft, Andrea will actually explain it is a work in progress. And then you have a break for lunch. And then we will continue with the budget update and discussions around activities and projects. And I have invited some activity managers of the big spend activities to attend at that time in case you have any questions you want to direct their way and for them to actually hear the conversation happening about their activity. Okay, and then we will wrap up and close. So for this morning, I just want to talk a wee bit about the rules of engagement. As it is a workshop setting, you cannot actually give us decisions per se that are going to definitively impact key council matters. What we will be asking for you are decisions around which direction you want us to pursue and what options you want us to bring back to you for you to make a decision on, if that makes sense. That means you're here to provide us really clear guidance and direction for those options on various subjects as we go through them. It is your opportunity to ask free and frank questions, and we welcome those. We just ask that you do so kindly. Officers are here to help and support you. We're not the enemy. We are here on this journey with you, okay? And let's look at what the main objectives are for this morning. We're going to recap the LTP process, what the requirements are and the timeline, introduce the financial assumptions. You've had all the other significant forecasting assumptions. This is now the financial ones. Discuss whether or not we've actually got those priorities right, as I mentioned, and get guidance on the debt cap. Like, what are we looking at? The status quo, which is at 2.1 times your revenue. Or are we looking at a model of 2.5 times or 2.8, which is the current legislative limit? And there is talk, of course, at central government level about raising that debt cap for all councils, especially in view of the infrastructure issues that are facing councils around the country. Depreciation, whether or not you want to fully fund it, partially fund it, or do a hybrid model. CapEx projects, what's in, out, deferred, or a mixture, okay? Community expectations, what is it your community expects you to deliver, okay? And what are you comfortable going out to the community with? And we're talking about everything from what story do you want to tell to what rate limits you actually want to put out there for rate rises, okay? Okay, so the long-term plan, you know it's a statutory requirement. Every term of council must complete this within their term. It's the 10-year plan that has all the activities, it has the budget, and it has the financial or funding impact statements, okay, which tells us where you get the income from, whether it's rates, fees and charges, grants, subsidies, all those things. And it actually gives the council that level of transparency and accountability for its community because it's their funds that you're spending. And it's part of the planning and reporting cycle. So as soon as you adopted the annual report, we stole the finance team and they were straight into long-term plan. As soon as the long-term plan's adopted, we're back into annual report. As soon as that's adopted, we're into annual plan. And the cycle goes on and on. Okay. We talked before about the various documents. There's many more than what you see, but these are the key ones that the Audit New Zealand will actually review and audit and give an opinion on. So all of these have to be right and they all have to match. So that means that they all have to tell the same story. So we start with the asset management plans, particularly for the infrastructure areas, and that leads into the activity management plans. Quite often for external providers such as Waka Kotahi, they're the one and the same because you have to be able to manage your asset in order to manage the activity. Here at Council, under the LGA, we have activity management plans for a lot of activities that have no assets. So we have a slightly different meaning than what's often accepted in infrastructure. That leads, of course, to the budgets, the first cut of which you are seeing and we're discussing today. And then that goes into the infrastructure strategy and the financial strategy, both of which have been partially drafted, but we need a lot more information and some definitive decisions from Council to complete those. And that, of course, will lead us into the LTP. So if we look at the timeline coming up, and I apologize if that's actually quite small, but all of this information that we're presenting today is available for you on the hub. It's all been uploaded. So the long-term plan approach and timetable, that was decided with Audit New Zealand, and on the 12th of December, they will be reviewing some of our information, and we've confirmed the dates. Looking at the budgets review and change requests, it started at the end of November. That continues on until the end of January, when we have that draft LTP document, which goes off to audit for them to review. We're looking at budget workshops. Okay, this is one. We are scheduling more in January and February. The draft long-term plan, we have workshops to discuss the various chapters, but of course you can't officially adopt anything in those workshops. So we're proposing that those will be on council meetings on the 26th of March and the 9th of April. Engagement with the community boards. I have visited the community boards, and other people have as well, and we are working with them particularly around some of the submissions to go for the long-term plan. And we're proposing that we will be engaging with them again, of course, with the consultation document around the 15th to the 17th of April. The consultation document preparation, that commences once we've actually had a bit more direction from you, so we can define what the actual issues are and what's the story you want to go out to the community. That happens over January to March. The Audit New Zealand will get a draft of a straw man's consultation document in December and January, but they will have it to review officially in February. We will be giving it to them for them to review. It takes about 4 to 5 weeks for them to go through and review it. And then they give it back to us with any changes that we have to make, which we engage with council. And we're looking at you adopting that document about the 9th of April for it to go out in consultation. The consultation will begin from the 12th of April and go on till the 12th of May. We had previously anticipated it would be March and April, but due to, like we said, resourcing issues, particularly with audit, they've actually asked us to defer, and we said we will make it work. We just asked that it wasn't over the Easter break, so that we actually had the community for whilst they're here, and we didn't lose any of that time. The consideration of the submissions. Submissions will be open, of course, from the 12th of April. It will take us some time to process those submissions for officers to make comments on, and then we give them back to you, and we set up a whole bunch of hearings. We've scheduled 3 days for the hearings, and that's between the 27th to the 29th of May. Given us time to actually adapt the long-term plan, give it back to audit with the new changes for them to do their final review. And the long-term plan should be adopted at the last council meeting of this financial year, which is on the 25th of June. Should that not occur, we can legally adopt up until the 1st of July and still be within the legislative timeframes, because the 30th of June falls on a weekend. Okay, so if we have to call a special meeting, we will, but we are aiming not to at this stage. Okay, so the key council dates for you guys, 30th of January to the 1st of February. Possibly there will be more workshops needed depending on how much we get through, and we will advise you closer to the time. The 13th of February is when we want you to consider the draft LTP and consultation document for audit prior for it going for the in-depth review. The 9th of April, as we said, that's when you adopt it to go out for consultation after we've had the changes back from audit. I've talked about the consultation period and the hearings and the long-term plan adoption meeting. Okay. Jess, can we get rid of that, please? Thank you. Okay, so when we talk about the activity structure, what gets very confusing is we do funding impact statements at the group of activity level, not at the individual activity level within the long-term plan. And so we need to distinguish what's the difference between the two. So the group of activities, the GOAs, those are the ones that to the community, it's what they see every council delivers, okay? So it's things like your community services or water or recreation facilities, things like that. But underneath those, of course, are a whole bunch of activities. So for this long-term plan, you have 10 groups of activities. You have 21 activities with activity management plans. Not every activity has done them because a lot of the corporate service ones, which are the internal, very operational units, they haven't done activity management plans. It's the ones that are about the service to the community that we focused on. We have some group of activities and activities that are the one and the same. For instance, water is a group of activity, but it's an activity in of itself. But in that activity, you have a number of schemes that are identified. So each one of those schemes have their own budget, okay? And as I said, we have the funding impact statements that are at the group of activity levels in both your annual plans and your long-term plans, and that's what we report on at the annual report. And it's really important to note, and this is where it gets very confusing, is that how they're structured in the LTP does not reflect how the organization is structured. Every council structures its organization differently. So how these activities report to you via whichever committee won't necessarily match what's out there in the LTP to the public eye. Okay. So when we look at community services, the activities underneath them, and as you know from what's reported due to the various committees, these cross a number of different units or groups within the organization. So you've got the airport, you've got community development, which incorporates community funding. You've got your civil defense and emergency management, excuse me. You've got council housing, the economic development, and you also have development, which is more around the infrastructure aspects. You've got your public amenities, which are your campgrounds, fishing huts, halls, and public toilets. In rec and leisure, you've actually got your art gallery, your stadium, your libraries, your museum as it exists now, and the Theatre Royal and Heritage Center. Then, of course, you have your swimming pools, of which Sea Bay is underneath that, and the gyms tend to fall under the swimming pools as well. In environmental services, we have the three main activities being building control, district planning, and environmental compliance. And as you know, in environmental compliance, you have a number of activities underneath that, such as animal control or health licensing and liquor licensing. Now we're coming to the activities that are actually group of activities as well. So you've got your corporate services, which are all the internal facing activities I mentioned before. You have governance, you have waste minimization, you've got land transport, and then you have water supply, wastewater, and stormwater. Okay, any questions about any of those at this point? Right, now I'm going to hand over to James, who's actually going to do a slight recap over some of the financial principles that we have covered previously.
Hello and welcome to this long-term plan video on financial principles. I'm James and I'm speaking on behalf of the long-term plan project team to cover the information for the upcoming budget workshop. With initial budget projections now available, Council is viewing the impact of the substantial capital works program holistically for the first time. Before detailing these figures at the workshop, we should review fundamental financial management principles underlying your ultimate long-term planning decisions. We have covered a great deal of this material over the past few months, but this video is to recap many of the core concepts. The Local Government Act outlines 5 key financial responsibilities for councils. First, they must act prudently and with care when managing funds. Second, budgets require a 2-phase approval process. Third, long-term financial strategies and infrastructure plans must be developed and formally accepted. Fourth, councils need to implement policies guiding funding allocations and fiscal decisions. Finally, balanced annual budgets are mandatory. Prudence is the foremost standard applied to all councils' fiscal choices and actions. It must be evident throughout assets' useful lifetimes. Seeking suitably qualified advice and following industry norms may be necessary. The Local Government Act mandates prudence without defining it. As per the Oxford Dictionary, prudence means careful, sensible, or acting deliberately. Councils must consider current and future community interests. Artificially low rates now would unfairly burden future ratepayers and raise prudence concerns. However, not borrowing for infrastructure, thus overtaxing present users, would also draw attention. Several questions guide councils in evaluating budgetary prudence within long-term plans, listed on pages 15 to 16 of the dollars and cents reading that we gave earlier to you. Page 17 outlines fiscal prudence benchmarks that regulations require councils to assess and report on. Balanced budgets are often misunderstood. The LGA states operating revenues need only meet annual operating costs, not match them. Therefore, projecting differing revenue and expense levels may be fiscally prudent. The words OPEX and CAPEX are used frequently in council, especially at budget-setting times. OPEX is our day-to-day operating expenditure for things that keep the council machine running. It pays the bills and is usually fully funded by rates or fees and charges. CAPEX is the capital expenditure for big-ticket items like building facilities, roading and water renewals, or increasing your levels of service to cater for growth or higher community expectations. Council has its financial strategy which sets the parameters of how it manages its budgets. Currently, the strategy has a self-imposed limit on borrowing, which is 2.1 times the income for the 10-year period. This is less than the legal limit of 2.8 times that Council could borrow against its revenue. The strategy also sets the limit on rating increases, stating a limit of 7% annual rate rise for existing ratepayers, with a rate take target of 4.9%. Obviously, with the extra costs incurred, Council has breached its own policy of the 7% rate rise limit. For this LTP, Council may wish to raise that self-imposed limit. Council has also defined a balanced budget as being everyday costs should be paid from everyday revenue. The financial strategy also gives Council the strategic influence over how it can adjust the budget through levers and actions tailored to address significant issues. Jason has explained these levers to you in a workshop, but to refresh your memory, they are: choosing between increasing your rates or your fees and charges, reducing your OPEX, delaying or reprioritizing your CAPEX projects, increasing your debt, selling any tangible assets to pay for CAPEX, exploring any untapped central government funding available, or finally, reducing how much you fund your depreciation. For years, underfunding depreciation was commonplace among councils nationwide, as most alternatives directly impact ratepayers or levels of service. Each approach carries trade-offs. However, skimping on depreciation funding has put this council in its current predicament, with aging infrastructure requiring renewal or repairs without sufficient reserves to address all needs. Even recognizing its budget impacts, council may still underfund depreciation in the proposed long-term plan draft, given the immediate rate relief it allows. This table analyzes the impact of various financial levers on rates, debt, and other factors for the LTP. It outlines the potential consequences of different financial strategies. Increasing debt through loan funding could lead to higher rates increases in future years, but allows for work to be done in the current LTP 10-year timeframe. Increasing rates will likely lead to community dissatisfaction, but enables more work to be done and maintains levels of service. Reducing operational expenditure and/or level of service could result in reduced levels of service, maintenance delays that may incur higher costs later, and community dissatisfaction. Reprogramming capital expenditure could cause project delays, which may lead to higher project costs and spread out debt, as well as community dissatisfaction. Increasing non-rates revenue like fees and charges does not affect debt but could lead to user dissatisfaction and has legislative and policy limitations. Other funding such as government subsidies may increase delivery expectations and create contingencies on the funding. Not fully funding depreciation could lead to a reduced level of service, increases the necessity for recovery in future years, and creates potential future funding issues. Selling assets could result in the opportunity cost of less revenue from assets if they contribute to income revenue presently. The financial challenges highlight potential issues such as higher rates increases, reduced service levels, maintenance and project delays leading to higher costs, community and user dissatisfaction, legislative and policy limitations, increased delivery expectations, and potential future funding and recovery issues. The LGA also stipulates the policies that form part of the financial management portfolio to support the LTP. These include the rating policies, development or environmental contributions policies, and treasury management policies amongst others. The revenue and finance policy definitively establishes rate determination and allocation between ratepayers. Rates must comply with this binding policy, which we consult on alongside the LTP. Vinci has sent you information about this previously, and you will be reviewing this in January when looking at the draft LTP document. Financial statements adhere to generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, disclosing the previous year and next decade. Supplementary LGA-mandated disclosures also apply. The budget balancing statement is required for roads and footpaths, but we use the same format for the LTP. We present funding impact statements for all of Council and for each group of activities. They set out what rates and charges are being set, how they are being set, and the implications to the ratepayer. The rating base information is a statement of the estimated number of rating units at the end of each financial year. Reserve funds information is a requirement to provide transparency for all monies set aside for a specific purpose. The other information included in the LTP is the significance and engagement policy summary statement and the significant forecasting assumptions. These are a fundamental basis for the whole LTP, and Audit New Zealand reviews them critically for relevance and being evidence-based. The significant forecasting assumptions, which are part of the environmental scan draft you have previously reviewed, have been updated. The revised environmental scan now incorporates financial assumptions, which will be explained at the upcoming workshop. An updated draft of the environmental scan containing the new financial assumptions will be sent to you. This brings us to the end of our recap of the main financial principles. Thank you, councillors, for taking the time to review this key information before the workshop. We will quickly view it again at the start of the workshop as you take your seats to help set the scene. As always, you can direct any questions you may have to the project team if you want any clarification on specific items.
Okay, as you can see, the intention was to send that out previous to today. Didn't quite happen. But if you want to watch it again, by all means, please feel free to do so. It'll be on your greatest hits on Spotify. Thank you. Okay, now we're getting to the financial assumptions. The environmental scan is a very large document which is too big to send to you via email, so it has been loaded onto the hub for you all to download. If you would like a hard copy of that, please let me know. Keep in mind at this point in time, the environmental scan is still draft because things are still changing politically as we speak. So until the day we adopt the long-term plan, I think it will be an iterative document, okay? So let's talk about the financial assumptions. We have not presented those to you before. We wait for Burrell to come out with their report. That has also been loaded. The 2023 report has also been loaded onto the hub for you. Now, Burrell uses what we call the LGCI, which is the Local Government Cost Index. That is the equivalent of the CPI, which of course is about the basket of goods for the average household. But there's one developed specifically for local government. We use Burl because they are the industry standard, and quite frankly, they pretty much have a monopoly on this side of things because there's very little competition within New Zealand to Burl. I believe there's an outfit based from Massey University. But by and large, most councils use Burl, and what's very important, so do Audit New Zealand. So we're all very much aligned. Audit New Zealand want to review this environmental scan and these significant forecasting assumptions, and we will be sending them to them next week. So I invite you to critically review and check and see that the changes that have been recommended to me previously are all reflected. If not, just give me a wee prompt because I need you to be happy with them before I send them to audit, okay? And as I said before, they're not a definitive endpoint by any stretch of the means at this point. So let's talk about what our financial assumptions are. The first one is we're talking about inflation. So we're saying that our LTP, the assumption is it's based on the table below for the periods from 2024 on through to 2034. And it is based by the Burl, on the Burl information that they've presented. So that is the updated table from the most recent report that they have for 2023. That kind of tells you what the various inflation rates are for operational expenses, for capital expenses, and what the total is that we use. Of course, there are some risks there if it differs because I promise you before COVID, nobody would have actually predicted an inflation rate globally of 7%. So through LTP variations, we can make changes to our base assumptions over the course of the long-term plan period. Consequences, of course, is change revenue and expenditure, and it means that that can consequently have impact on rates and affordability. And so what do we do to mitigate that? We pretty much follow and monitor central government direction, particularly around the affordable waters reform, and then we budget appropriately through the annual plan, and we do reforecasting 6 months into every financial year just to ensure that we have things on track. Okay, so the reforecasting, I believe, for you is due in December, which will be brought to you at some stage in January, February. Okay. Interest rates on borrowing. Okay, we've made a base assumption that it will be between 4.8% to 6.2% for interest rates. Basically, for every $10 million of borrowing, a 1% increase in interest rates increases our costs by $100K, based on those assumptions. Okay, the risk being, of course, they could be higher or lower than what we actually forecast. Lower is good. The consequence of that, we actually have to increase or decrease our costs, and that means the interest costs could decrease by up to $3.5 million each year for a 1% movement in the interest rate, okay? Andrea could probably explain this a wee bit better, or Brad, going forward. But basically, interest rates do have an impact on us. Councillor Booth notes that very closely and monitors that. And rest assured, we keep a watchful eye on it as well. We have our liability management policy that actually stipulates how we will manage any variations. Our ROI, or our returns on investments, we actually look at between 5.4 to 5.7% based on the bond and bank deposit portfolios. TDHL, the dividend we assume is $1 million per annum, and of course, for forestry, at this stage, we have not projected any return. The little trees are still growing. Okay. I'm going to move on to the funding sources. We're actually anticipating, unless there is a new entity set up by central government for affordable waters reform, that we will have no changes to our funding sources at this point in time. So we pretty much tap into every funding source we can externally at this point in time. We specify those in the revenue and financing policy and the financial strategy, both of which will be going into more detail with the RFP at the end of January. Now, we have user fees, charges, and then we have the external funding from projects from like central government agencies. We don't collect development contributions. We've talked ad infinitum about that, and there should be a report coming exploring that option. So when I say that we actually tap into all external funding, I meant through government agencies, ones that actually offer grants or subsidies, et cetera, et cetera. Council itself could explore looking at things like more increased asset sales or looking at the development contributions. We will be looking at fees and charges critically going forward. That work has not happened yet, but activity managers will have to review them really carefully. What we're actually saying is that the risk is we may not get everything we expect. And the sources of funding could change or the level that they provide us. And the prime example of that, of course, is Waka Kotahi, because they have a different financial year than us. What we ask for, we know we don't always get what we ask for, but we usually come within cooee. If they come back with a vastly different amount, that means we have to make quick adjustments, and it either means we come back to council to say, are you willing to fund that shortfall, or we cut levels in service at that time. Okay. That brings me into the Waka Kotahi funding. We're assuming that it's going to remain at 51%, the FAR rate for the time being. And of course, that will be reviewed during the LTP cycle. That gets reviewed, well, Waka Kotahi reviews it regularly. And we will also be reviewing it, of course, for every LTP. And because of the different timing things, that's what creates that uncertainty for us. We say that the risk, the confidence of this assumption is what we call moderate. So it's not like we're highly confident that we know exactly what Waka Kotahi. We know within cooee, but we will be notified if there are changes. Okay, I've explained that the consequence of that means changes either into your level of service or more funding being sought from council to complete the whole work program. We're actually saying we think the costs that we have now will remain relatively stable. So we know that we're paying high costs. We have projected in for increased costs in some areas, but we're not projecting, unless there is a major global event that impacts things like supply chains, similar to what we experience. That could probably change some of our costing models, but of course we keep a watch on those, and we will make variations and amendments and bring those to council as needed when those events occur. Okay. Our rating base, we're pretty confident that we've actually got that pretty okay right now, because it hasn't changed widely. The increase in our rating base tends to come from more the commercial sector or from new industry coming. We don't have a high number of increases in the number of houses being built. You know, we're talking within a couple hundred at most, so that's not a significant change to our rating base, but we would like to actually explore, and I know Venture Timaru is very keen on how they can actually help support greater development to bring more people to come and reside in the district with more households. Okay. So where we actually pick that the greater increase in households will be is actually in the 1 to 2 persons household, and that's because of our aging population, which is the same up and down the country. Okay, so people are downsizing a lot. We do know that some of the building consents coming in are for 1 to 2 bedroom units that have a low square footage, but still enough to have a bit of a garden and kind of like the forever homes for the golden aged people like myself and beyond. Okay. Our credit availability, we're actually saying that we will still be able to obtain credit from the financial market at competitive rates, okay, and the terms and conditions. So we're keeping on with that. Then we're going into one of my favorites to look at, landfill aftercare. Okay, so we know that there's going to be significant restoration work needed on the most vulnerable closed landfills in the district, but Red Roof Landfill has no material changes to its post-closure costs because those landfill cells are actively monitored and managed, and we know the capacity of Red Roof Landfill. We know that we've got the budget of about $1 million per annum to address closed landfill remediation on an as-needs basis, and a lot of that will be about doing what work is needed to keep waste in situ in certain situations. We're going through that landfill risk assessment process where we will be able to bring to council and identify any landfills that are vulnerable to breaching because of climate change impacts due to their location really close to waterways or the risk to the immediate environment. Through some very excellent lobbying by His Worship the Mayor, you are well aware that we managed to get the Minister for the Associate Minister for the Environment has actually approved and encouraged that in the new waste legislation that they will address closed landfills that are vulnerable to the effects of climate change to have the waste levy fee waived for all landfills up and down the country, which is a huge bonus in our favor to help reduce the costs of relocating landfills to places like Red Roof in the future. Our ETS, our emissions trading scheme, we've worked on a base price of about $79 in year 1 because that's the information we actually have from the EPA as to the costs. And the market price beyond this is likely to rise. We purchase ETS credits when there is a unit credit sale happening. There's an auction this week that I'm aware of. We are in credit currently because we actually buy those units through the market because they're at the auction sales because they're usually cheaper than if we have to purchase them at the time we surrender because then we're using a secondary seller, if that makes sense. So we buy them when they're cheap, bank them, and then transfer them at the time that we actually have to do our ETS returns, which is in May every year. So we know we have to purchase more. We surrendered about 45,000 units in 2022. And this very past year, we surrendered only 35,000 units, but that looks like a bit of an anomaly, and we're reviewing as If it turns out the credit works in our favor, are very well and good, we will keep it. Okay, capital delivery. This is the one where, through very careful scrutiny by the infrastructure manager and his unit managers, they're looking very closely at capital delivery to make sure we're putting in plans for a reasonable and achievable work program. So we're going out there on the assumption that we will achieve 100% of what it is we are planning to do. That's our commitment to the community. We're saying that we're going to do this. So what we're saying we're going to do, we're being very careful about that to ensure that we're doing adequate planning. Due to the ongoing dynamics, weather events, supply chain issues, or what have you, should we not be able to achieve that, that will be reported by exception, and that normally happens every year for the annual report regardless, okay? And I believe that you're actually looking at, in future, getting activity reports, and that's where you will actually be able to hear throughout the year whether they're on time and on budget, and whether or not any carryovers will be needed. That will be where you will absolutely be able to signal throughout the year as to whether or not we have got our capital delivery projections correct. Okay, that's it for the financial assumptions. If you don't have any questions, I'll move on to strategic priorities, but if you come up with some questions or some thoughts, please feel free to email myself or any of the team, and we will address them in due course. Strategic priorities. Earlier on this year, I had you go into a few apps and you ranked all of the various focus areas underneath all of the community well-being outcomes to say what was the most important to you. We have come back with the top 5, the top 1 underneath each community well-being outcome. These are what you have actually voted on through your interactions in Poll Everywhere. However, we have not, all I've done is present these results to you. We have not had the opportunity for you all to actually discuss amongst yourselves in an open and frank conversation as to whether or not you think these are right. So I am actually going to turn the floor over to you at this point in time, and you can discuss and actually say whether or not you agree with these, or if you'd like to see some variation or changes in the priorities as to whether or not you think number 1 should be our facilities and services, or should we be actually looking at investing in the future. I'll hand it over to you now.
All righty, team. So what you're thinking in regard to 1 to 5, I'd move 3 to the top, to be fair, straight off the bat. What's everyone else is thinking? Don't be afraid to jump in. Alan?
Yeah, I'd tend to agree. It's invest in the future. I mean, obviously, I think enhanced lifestyle facilities and services probably should be perhaps second, but yeah, that would be my thoughts.
Can you just remind me what we mean by connected citizens enabling community, please?
Enabling the community is around the community engagement, particularly around giving them the opportunity for decision-making. So an example is like through the consultation, your engagement with community boards, the accountability and transparency.
And do you have the rest of the list?
It's within the LTP, and I can actually pull it up and actually give it to you, and I will be happy to actually send it around. It's still on Poll Everywhere. If you still have that app in your phones, you should be able to actually go into that poll, but I'm happy to resend you the link to that. Okay.
I'm happy with moving resilient infrastructure up to number 1 as well. Without resilient infrastructure, we don't have roads, we don't have water, we don't have anything that will help enhance lifestyles or connect citizens. So for me, infrastructure is key.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Councillor Parker. I wouldn't move it to number 1, I'd move it to number 2 behind enhanced lifestyle and facilities and services and making sure that we are delivering for our ratepayers. Happy with the rest of it though.
I'm not so sure about the connected citizens being that high up. I'd go infrastructure, probably lifestyle, economy. Sustainable environment, and then connected citizens kind of towards the bottom. Because I think, as Councillor Parker said, the infrastructure, facilities and services and diverse economy should drive those other two anyway.
Yeah, 100% agree. I'm happy to second that. Oh no, sorry, we're not making decisions.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so what I've actually heard is that you would like more priority on the resilient infrastructure, investing for the future, facilities, enhanced lifestyle facilities and services, and the the economy, leveraging local strength, then looking at clean environment, and then looking at enabling the community. Keeping in mind that these are the top 5 out of 26. So they're still very important, and it is what you said was most important under each one of your community well-being outcomes. So even though we're saying, okay, enabling community may not be number 2, it's still in our top 5, and it's still super important, okay? Right. So, councillors, what I will do is I will circulate and present to you a new priority list, and we will present that as part of the LTP for you to actually accept and decide. Those are definitely your priorities. Scott?
Can you just send the full list, 26 as well? So we've got the 5, but just to make sure, because I don't think we actually saw the results of the survey up on the,
Oh, you did.
the list of 26.
You had the list of 26 to actually choose from. That's how you got to these
But
5.
we didn't get the result we just got it on an app.
I can, yeah, and that is where the result is, on the app.
Yeah, can you just send it to me on a piece of paper?
Sure, absolutely.
I don't know where the
I can
shit
print
their
them out.
app is anymore.
Yeah. I can print them out and send them to you. Okay, that's fine. I can do that for you. Yep, I'll do that. Not a problem. Okay. Right, now we're getting towards the end. I just want to talk about some of the key questions because we're going to move into the budget and numbers side of today. And so I want you to actually just think about these questions as we're working through. And what are the non-negotiables? What are the items, the projects, what have you, that you deem as the non-negotiables? Now, councillors, these are questions I want you to think and reflect upon as we go through. I'm not asking you to answer this question for everything that comes up today, but just something to help with your framework. What are the mix of levers that you favor that we can use to actually adjust our funding, okay, and have impacts on those rates? What do you think is an achievable capital program for the LTP? Okay, and as a frame of reference, you normally deliver something, a few years ago, you were delivering around $30 million worth of CapEx every year. That's been upped to over 50 million, and you're delivering that. Okay, so infrastructure teams have really put in a concerted effort to achieve a lot more for this community. but you need to actually look at what's sustainable and achievable going forward. And I promise you, it's not doubling that figure to over $100 million worth of CapEx. We probably don't have enough contractors to deliver that. So let's actually just look at what's achievable. What's the story and the messaging that you want to tell the community for consultation? What are going to be the things that the community is going to say, yeah, we trust that this council has our best interests at heart and are being honest and truthful, and we have enough information to actually make a submission or know that they are making decisions in our best interests? What do you think is an acceptable range for a rates increase? Okay, you can give us an indication as to what you think will be acceptable and comfortable. Don't worry, the community will let you know if you have that right. Okay, should we fully fund depreciation? That's a question that is going to come up, and we're going to ask you to give us some direction as to what kind of models you want us to bring back to you about the depreciation funding. Should we be reviewing levels of service and considering changing some of them if affordability is an issue? So it comes down to 4 really key critical questions. What are the mission critical things that must be done? When you look at your CapEx, what's mission critical? What are the things that are nice to have but may not be a legislative blocker? So if you don't have it, it's not like you're going to face fines or prosecution or infringements or anything like that. Okay. What are the things that you need to avert calamity? What are the things that you would do? That kind of is a subset of the mission critical. What are the things you need to do to make sure that you are compliant, that you're avoiding disaster? And that can actually be as much about a political one as it will be a financial one or an environmental one or a health-related one. And what are you comfortable taking out to the community? Okay, what will you be comfortable with? Lastly, talking about what you'd be comfortable taking out to the community, I want to propose to you an idea for the engagement. I would love to be able to use your avatars as part of our material when we're looking at our consultation document and we're actually looking at the campaign going out. And of course, I'm going to ask each councillor to consider what are some of the key things you would like to champion and be associated with and perhaps be the spokespeople for when going out to the community. You do not have to answer those questions now or today, but I want you to stop and consider it as to what do you think you can champion.
I'd certainly like to endorse the use of Councillor Booth's avatar. I think that's fantastic.
A wee speech bubble that says, "Stop the madness."
Yeah, look, I really think we need to work out how many lollies we've got to throw around, first of all. And so, you know, I did ask some questions, which hopefully we've got some answers for before we start this discussion. I sort of look at depreciation, I read your thing here, and local authority must ensure that each year's projected operating revenues are set at a level sufficient to meet that year's projected operating expenses. That's called a balanced budget. And so I guess that's obviously, that's prudence. So I guess that starts there for me. The depreciation is a systematic allocation of across an asset over its useful life, and is not to provide for the replacement of the asset, although this may be the intended outcome if you continue to increase the value of the asset in the ground or wherever. Obviously, the cost continues to increase. So I guess the people who have funded that now are enjoying that, the benefit of that at that cost, and I guess the people coming on will have to pay more at the appropriate time to replace their asset. So I guess first of all, I'd like to know actually what we actually the state of our income is up to date, and our expenditure, so as we know what the situation. Last year we actually borrowed $22 million just to pay the wages. So I'm concerned we need that, and that is not a balanced budget. So, and also I note that you mentioned 1% was 100,000. It's actually 72,000.
That's a rate increase, sir.
Yeah, so 1%. So if we want to
Not
get
rate
another
increase is
72%,
700,000.
72,000, we need to increase, or 1%, it's 72,000, because that's what we're rating. So I guess that's the income. I'm talking about the income. So
1%, Ellen, is now 700K, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah, well, 700.
700, yeah.
700. Yeah.
Percent is 700,000.
At present, yep. I note also that our funding from Qatar has been fairly stable at about 13 to 14 million over the last 3 or 4 years. And although they say that they're talking about decreasing that at 1% per year. But so I guess there's in our projected budget, I'd like to ensure that we're actually got some realistic numbers in there and conservative numbers, not numbers that perhaps are wishful thinking. And so otherwise we can't make any decisions. We cannot even talk about this stuff until we've actually got this sorted, because otherwise, the way I see it, we could be potentially lining up for another result like we did last year. So we need to confront that right now and ensure it so as we actually do have a conversation based around our abilities to do anything. So I guess that's where I'll start that conversation.
Yeah, look, I guess as a group of councillors, my concern, we've got a debt to revenue ratio of 2.1, the maximum's 2.8. On the figures we've been provided for, we exceed 2.8. And I know there's ways around that, but I think we need to think where we're comfortable to move that ratio to. Because at 2.8, if something goes wrong, we have to either massively increase rates or sell some of the silverware. And last time that was suggested, it didn't go down very well in the community. So look, we can go line by line through the CapEx, and there's things that I think are missing and there's things that probably don't need done. But overall, we need to have a philosophy of where we're going to hit, I would have thought, before we cut and burn in some ways, because then our finance team can give us some real numbers about where we are comfortable with our debt level. That's kind of where I'm at, because otherwise we're exposing ourselves and our ratepayers.
Thanks, Stu. And look, and I'd like to start personally more with our revenue actually, and what's our level of comfort. And then once we know what our income is, then we can have a look at what the projects are that fit within it. But two key things that we've got to be considering is, one, what's the interest rate spread that we're comfortable with over the life of the plan, whether it's been, I think it was 4.2 to 6.2. I think I had 4 and 6. It was roughly the point. To Stu's point, I agree. I'm comfortable with the 2.5, but we need a buffer sitting in there as well. And where's my notes? I think through this time, I'd also like us to have a priority around growing depreciation over the life of the plan. So to the point that you made yesterday, Alan, if we've got depreciation of 32 million sitting in there, anything over that that's spent on CapEx is effectively debt. So at the end of this long-term plan, it would be nice to have 50 or whatever the number is, or $60 million worth of depreciation sitting in there. So actually, that is driving our capital program, so it's not all loan funded moving forward. So we actually have a target around where we get to in depreciation. But pass to anyone that wants to comment.
I guess, we talked about our debt cap, and, it wasn't that long ago, we were actually at 1.2. It went to 1.5, 1.8, and now 2.1. And those numbers have grown astronomically. May have been okay while we had, if the interest rate was similar to our depreciation rate, because that would make sense. But we do need to be conscious that interest rates have changed. I feel as if over the life of a couple of terms in council, we've gone from, as I say, 1.2, probably having debt 40 to 50 million, up to here we are now, 175 in a very short period of time. And, and here we are looking to go again. And I feel as if we probably, first of all, need to know the facts around our income and expense, and ensure that we have a balanced budget before we allow anything else further to happen, because otherwise we will continue and are continuing to borrow for wages and interest. So I think we just need to, as I say, those numbers make a big difference. I've done some assumptions around fees and charges being what they were last year. I've also included subsidies and grants in at 13.5, which is what they were roughly last year. And then in the expense side, I've put 61 million in there for general expense and 10 million for finance costs, which is actually quite realistic. And if you're a prudent budgeter, that's what you'd have in there. It's an income. Let's see. Basically shows an income of 112 million against our budget 128. I know that we have a further MB amount to come in regards to the theatre at the appropriate time, but that's only 6.9 million. That's an income of 112 million. Last year, year prior, it was 102. Last year, it was 106, but then there was a vested interest added onto that, which wasn't cash. That was actually borrowed money, okay? So here we are now, 112, and that's showing a loss for the year of $16 million, which I think is the very first thing we talk about to ensure that we are talking about the right numbers. We're not putting any gloss on it. And so as when we do go to look at these issues on this, the capital items, we are working from something with some fact and some base of knowledge. So I guess that is when I talk about the expense, I'm talking about I used the number from last year for other expenses, and as I say, I wouldn't bet on that. I'm probably not that far away. So I'd like to hear what everyone's got to say about that.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Thank you, councillors. Okay, this is a great segue into the financial part of this morning's presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Andrea and Brad. They're going to take you through some high-level figures. I welcome and encourage you to ask questions as we go along, and we will also be asking questions of you. On the whiteboard behind you over there, I will be making some notes because we are seeking direction, and as today goes through, you'll be able to kind of give us an idea, and we'll have them documented. Both myself and Tony will be writing on the whiteboard as we go, and we'll be taking notes. And we just want to have some real clarity, and you get to check that we have that right so that when we come back to you, we're delivering what it is that you're actually asking for. So I'll hand over to Andrea now, and we look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Fitzy. Andrea Rankin, Chief Financial Officer. So these slides were put together as essentially a starting talking point, knowing that it's a work in progress, that the finance team have had essentially 2 weeks to pull something together, considering our annual report was signed off on the 14th of November. So it is a very early stages of a document, but like Vince has pointed out and like Alan has, suggested, is that, we're wanting to know, or some direction as to where you'd like to head in regards to debt caps, in regards to capital projects, and essentially operational side of things. So we can work through the slides very quickly, and then obviously we'll open it up for discussion around what it is that you would like the finance team to, and SLT in particular, to work on to then bring back in January some, more firmed up scenarios. So once again, just highlighting a couple of things that to make a 1% movement in rates, we're looking to at $700,000. So if we were to reduce operational costs by $700,000, then we'd have a potential 1%. So I guess to keep in the back of your mind, that's the kind of dollar value that we require to make significant changes to rates. So at the
Sorry,
moment,
Andrea, can I just make a point? All these scenarios are just purely hypothetical.
Yep.
And because we're not proposing that these are things that we're going to take forward. They're
No.
purely for discussion. And the point I make is we don't want a headline being, this is what the council's thinking. It's not what we're thinking.
No.
It's purely just for discussion. Yeah.
So when we get to the different scenarios, essentially it was more about if we went this way, this is essentially what it would look like. If we made some changes, then this is what it would look like. So once again, they were just scenarios that, we took from prior discussions around council meetings and the like around, what may or may not be out there. Yeah. So once again, the debt ratio is an area that we need to have a discussion about, whether we want to stick to 2.1. If we want to try and stick to 2.1, then, we've got some hard decisions on what we can and can't spend.
Those things that we want to work through, do you want to do that as we go?
Yep, we
Yep.
could.
Or do you want to get through the presentation?
We'll go through the presentation and then we can
Yep,
essentially discuss the 5 things that are on the board. Yep.
Sorry, Andrew, just recommended limit will be 2.8. I thought that was the maximum possible.
That is the maximum possible, but on the scenarios that we've put to you, 2.1 we would breach next year. So it's essentially it's a recommendation that when we've put these scenarios together, we've used as that is all you've got.
Sorry, so you've recommended 2.8 or what have you done your figures on? That's what
2.8.
Which is the maximum we can
Which
go
is the
to.
maximum.
Wow.
Yeah.
But as I was getting before, if we're only going to have a predicted income of 112 million, we're actually at the debt ceiling almost now at 235. So, that number we need to be, and that number should be prudent. It shouldn't be a number that we're actually just wishing for.
Yep. So we'll take that into consideration.
Yeah, that's all right. I think if we get through the presentation and then we can have a good in-depth discussion will be the way to approach it.
So essentially, we've talked about the four key areas is the depreciation, the capital program, uncertainty around Three Waters. At this point, Three Waters is in there as if we've continued with it for the next 10 years. And then obviously, cost of inflation going forward. So once again, we presented two scenarios. So these were just random scenarios. We could have had a combination of all sorts. So scenario one essentially was a full capital program, including a theatre, a stadium, city town, art gallery, as well as all of the infrastructure projects that we have to do. Then scenario two was around the theatre and keeping the stadium in there. As part of the last long-term plan, those two items were part of the last long-term plan within the first 3 years of that. So we've left those in because we've had significant discussion about those. So that's essentially what the two scenarios were put together using the information that we've got. The scenario one, unsmoothed, essentially is if we were to fund everything. That's what it would look like.
Andrew, can you just confirm on that? It's got the surpluses in brackets and the deficit is not. I asked this question on email and I didn't quite get the answer. Well, I'm not sure I read the answer, sorry.
Yeah. So
are we saying we're going to have a $6 million deficit in 2020?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
And can I also ask, at what level are we depreciating here?
So that's based on 100% depreciation with roading at 50%.
Correct.
Roading at 50% because Waka Kotahi subsidised 50% of the roading. Yeah. So this is essentially, as is now, work in progress, the data that we have. So the second...
And on the 128 million income.
Yes. So the second scenario is the same base data, but what would we need to, there was a couple of years, how do I go backwards that way? There was a couple of years that we actually went over the 2.8 limit that we'd set. So this scenario here, in those years 29, 20, 31, 32 and 34, they've had an increase of rates at that point to bring us within the 2.8 limit. Scenario 3 is a smooth model. So what a smooth model is essentially looking at the 10 years all together and essentially applying a rate and then smoothing out the remaining years so that over the 10-year period, all going according to plan, we would then be covering what we needed to cover. So I think traditionally that's what this council has done. And there's nobody to answer that. Andrew, is that we've used the smooth model traditionally in the past? Do you know?
That was our approach in the last one because
Yeah.
it was up and then it was 4.9.
Was it in any of the prior ones?
I couldn't tell you as far as the... no. Yeah.
Yeah. So, scenario 2, yeah.
Andrea, did we give you the nod that council was comfortable at going up to 2.8, and is that why you have modelled them on 2.8, or how did
No.
how did the finance team get to the place to model at 2.8?
I can answer that.
That income versus is showing increase in what we need to fit this. So no one's given direction. This models what is required if we're going to achieve all of that. So there needs to be some slash and burn.
Yeah.
If you don't want it to go to 2.8, that's the, well, it is, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat today because this is real.
And I think that's what we asked for too. It's quite real. So let's, yeah.
I guess just to reiterate what the assumption is. So the assumption is we've included the full CapEx project list that we need. And, you know, in most of those years, it's come up cooey near 2.8. And then in the years 20, and clearly we can't go above 2.8 because that doesn't, we can't actually do that. So there was a couple of years where we've bumped the rates income, about 2029, we have bumped it up so that we meet the 2.8. So we've just used 2.8 because that is our maximum. But it's not really based on us saying, hey, 2.8, let's use that. It's more just that's what falls out of it, yeah?
So essentially, a model with 2.1 is going to show that obviously we need to not do capital projects, we need to look in depth at operational expenditure, need to look at fees and charges, whether we can, you know, get some more income out of fees and charges, all of those scenarios, so that the rates essentially is not significant.
Councillors, I'll just remind you that all of the stuff that is being modelled, and these are only just like the first cut, they're not definitive, it's based on commitments you've already made to the community, and we're actually just showing you, okay, financially, the reality is this is what's actually going to be required. Are you comfortable with this? There's no way you can do what you've already promised you can do without borrowing more. So, and I know the mayor has also talked about central government potentially looking at lifting the debt cap. A lot of this has actually also come about because having newer valuations, we now know the depreciation costs have increased, et cetera, et cetera. So just bear with us as we go through all of these models and these scenarios. But one of the things we're seeking direction from you is, are you comfortable at a 2.8 model, or are we looking at 2.5, or do you want to retain it at 2.1? Every yes you make leads to a no. So what is it you're going to say no to make the yes real and achievable?
Yeah, I guess.
I would be very concerned if you think it's okay that we raise our debt levels to 2.8. So first of all, I feel great that you're all going, no, you don't feel comfortable, because that is terrible business. So I just hope that I know what you've presented, but I can tell you right now there is no way I support this at all. And I think, you know, I'm thinking about a 2.4 max, 2.5, but honestly, let's have that conversation. I've done some modelling on that, a bit like probably Alan. We're always a bit different. But yeah, I think it's, unfortunately, you know, my job is to protect the fixed income families, and this does not protect them. And so, yeah, that's where I'd like to start. Where my philosophy is how it is protecting our fixed income families.
Thank you. That's a really good start for a direction. I need to make really clear, this is not about how we feel at all. And it's not about, we can give you our professional advice, but remembering that a lot of staff here are ratepayers too. So this is just us presenting the facts and showing you the options that you have.
Can I just ask for a point of clarification on this, Andrea? 2025, is that chart actually suggesting 18% rate increase, so the rest of those numbers flow through?
Yeah.
Good luck with telling anyone that.
So if you haven't picked up, the first one, I think there's the first model's got 31%.
Yeah.
So it's all hypothetical. So I wouldn't get too stressed about that. Let's finish. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to Councillor Scott's comment. The higher we have that debt cap, the lower we can keep rates. Because if we make that debt cap lower and we need to, you know, spend some money on stuff, we need to have higher rates so that that debt cap doesn't get breached. So I just think it's a bit of reverse of what you were just saying, in that you need to protect low-income families, yes, but in my mind, you do that by having the higher cap, because then you don't need to lift rates as much.
But then where's the scenario around?
I'm not suggesting we do 2.8, but
I
I was
know,
just,
but the
thinking
debt
the higher we have,
repayment versus depreciation, and
there's a
what
whole
are we
lot of other
funding?
issues in there, but the
Yes.
higher we have the debt cap, the lower, we don't need to lift rates as much, if we get into trouble with borrowing too much money.
That is my concern.
Yeah, I know, I agree with you on that point, but
I guess, it's about prudence.